Welcome to Afternoon Tea and Talk for the State Library of Victoria. My name is Astrid Edwards, and before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I live and work, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I would like to acknowledge elders, past, present, and future, and I would like to note that sovereignty was never ceded. This land always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Today it is my great pleasure to talk about the anthology Growing Up Disabled in Australia with Andy Jackson and Sarah Firth. This anthology is very close to my heart. I should disclose, I do have a piece in the anthology, and I think that it is a significant contribution, the anthology itself, to Australian literature. Andy and Sarah, thank you so much for joining me. Sarah, I know that we are relatively close together today on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. Andy, you're coming to us from Castlemaine.
Yes, that's right. I'm living and working on Dja Dja Wurrung country, and obviously really aware of their care for this place and their storytelling over the years that has sustained where we are. So yeah, really, really honoured to be joining you here.
For those watching us today, we will be taking questions. If you would like to ask a question of Andy or Sarah, please just type it into the State Library's website, the Slido function. You will need a hashtag, and the hashtag is Afternoon Tea and Talk. So please send all of your questions through to Andy and Sarah. But otherwise, let's get started with some introductions. Sarah, you are a comic artist, a graphic recorder, a writer, and an animator. And you actually have a graphic essay on complexity, which was listed in the Conversation's 10 Best Literary Comics, which is quite the achievement. Congratulations and welcome.
Hello, thank you. It's really lovely to be here with both of you.
And Andy, you are a poet and a teacher, and I do know you from RMIT University. You have been a poet for a very long time. You have co-edited disability-themed issues of the journals, the Southerly and the Australian Poetry Journal, and your piece actually kicks off the anthology. Well done, securing that place right up the front.
Thanks. I would have been terribly intimidated if I knew it was going to be the first in the book. So luckily I was totally ignorant of that, and I just wrote, as they say, from the cliche, from the heart.
From the heart is the best place to write, Andy. Now, you both work with words and stories. You communicate with people in such a different way, but at the heart of it, it is connecting with others. And obviously, your background is writing for both of you, and that is kind of the obvious answer to why you submitted to Growing Up Disabled in Australia. But I'm really interested in what was the impetus for you to submit your work. For those watching, it was a competitive process. There were many, many more submissions than were finally published in the anthology. And I'm wondering, maybe Sarah, if you start, why did you do it? Particularly storytelling in about such a personal part of you.
Yeah, I was very shy actually about submitting a piece because I've only sort of come to understand my disability as an adult. So I'm 36. So, I'm still kind of going through this very strange process of making sense of a lot of, growing up disabled and not knowing. And just over the past few years of my, coming to understand how my brain works and the differences that I have as a neurodivergent person, there were so many people that I had private conversations with who said, oh my gosh, me too. I struggle with that. Or my child struggles with that. I didn't realize what that was. And so I felt very compelled by this feeling of like talking about these things helps other people feel less alone. And so I was very motivated by that. So it's kind of a healing thing. And like even just since the book has come out, lots of people have messaged me saying, I resonated so much with your story. Like I experienced that. And, I finally went and, got an appointment with Spelled to get, dyslexia diagnosis or figured out that my son is autistic, these kinds of things. And, that makes me feel really, happy that I did, do that, even though obviously I felt quite quite nervous. So yeah.
I also felt nervous. Sarah, you're certainly not alone there. Andy, I'd like to give the floor to you.
Sure. Yeah. Look, I think for some people in the anthology, it looks to me like there's a real sense of they've always felt disabled, always felt proud of it, and it's not an issue. For me, it's always been way more complicated and always kind of wavering about, am I disabled? Am I not? What does it mean to claim that or not? And so seeing the call out, I kind of thought, all right, I'm going to at least write an essay, write my story. And even in the process of writing it, it helped me understand what my disability is and what my, perhaps a little bit more about what my place in the community is. So it was partly just a kind of, well, let's explore it and affirm it and say, yes, that's my experience, even if it is also complicated still. But yeah, it was a really useful process personally, but especially being accepted and realizing that I'm part of this sort of amazingly diverse, complicated community. It's great.
You use the word claim. Am I right in thinking that that's kind of claim this identity, or at least claim this public identity in words of your choosing?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think there's still so many myths about disability, and that usually it's about being in a wheelchair or, really obvious, like visually, things to do with illness, I think, and the things to do with impairment. But yeah, so for me, I've sort of slowly come to realize that it's much more about not fitting in because of your body. And so that's how I take it. And it can happen in many, many different ways. So to claim it, I think, like Sarah was saying before, it helps you, but it also helps other people who might be in a similar situation to say, actually, yeah, I've experienced that too, and I'm not alone in it. And there are things that we need to fix. So yeah, that aren't about your own body necessarily. It might be, but often it's about the culture and the society.
Absolutely. There are so many things we need to fix, and it's not individuals, it's the barriers that exist and the attitudes that exist out there. I would like to ask you, when you submitted, the submissions went in at the end of 2019. Now, obviously 2020 was a year that we will all remember, and the publication of Growing Up Disabled in Australia was postponed due to COVID. But that does mean that there's an extra long time between now, when you are talking about your writing, a long time between now and when you first wrote it. And I'm wondering, noting that last year was a difficult year, how much have you changed, or how much has your understanding of yourself changed? And would you write the same thing? Sarah, shall we start with you?
I feel like I'm more confident. Like, I felt very, very shy about submitting, partly because similarly to you, Astrid, my disability is invisible, and I felt very uncomfortable about that because I have various privileges, and I felt very reluctant to take up space in the disability community. I didn't feel like I had a right to be there, to be honest, but talking with more people and understanding how complex and huge the disability space is has made me feel more comfortable and confident that it is an inclusive, very diverse space, and the more people can connect and talk and share, the better, in my opinion. So I guess for me, over the past year, I felt more confident, and also just in my day-to-day life, feeling more confident, like Andy was saying, of just challenging people's prejudice, or because for me, often I'll make mistakes with words or with numbers, and people will make a joke or make fun of me. And in the past, I'd kind of laugh it off, but now I'll just say, oh, I have dyscalculia, I'm really bad with numbers, or I do struggle with writing words and sometimes saying words, maybe you could help me, and just feeling much more solid in being able to just not feel so much shame about that. So that's been a big change for me over the past year. Yeah.
Shame is such a powerful thing and a powerful word. It thrills me what you just said, Sarah, that you don't feel so much shame. That is, I hope that for everybody in Australia who feels different and everybody who has an illness or a disability. Andy, if we were submitting this month, would you write the same piece?
Look, it's funny. I think I'm really glad that we got to write our essays before the start of the pandemic, because I think it's such a overwhelming experience, and it would have made me think a lot more about our connections, you know, how intimately connected we are, because that's really reminded me of that this era. But I actually think what's happened in the process of the book coming out, I felt like reading it, I mean, it's so fascinating, but it's also quite, the word that comes to mind is tenderizing. I felt really, even though a lot of the stories are so different to my experience, it's quite moving, and it reminds me of the stuff that I went through when I was growing up. And so I wouldn't want to write, I mean, I don't know if I'm even ready to write something else like that now, because I feel like I need time to process the experience of reading those other essays, the experience of talking about it in public again, bringing it all up. And it's curious because for me, my experience is a lot about being stared at. And so being in public and talking about it is both empowering, but it's also quite uncomfortable as well. So, I mean, I think it's similar for everybody who's disabled, but it's, you know, that sense of being visible and owning things, it's complicated. But yeah, I will keep writing about it, of course. But every year it'll be different, you know? Yeah.
It's certainly not a static
No.
experience. Sarah, your piece is called Drawing My Way. Now, firstly, that is a great title. I really enjoyed that. And just for the people who are watching, I just briefly want to hold up and show you, this is Sarah's piece. It is a graphic cartoon. It stands out in the anthology because almost everybody else, with the exception of a poem or two, wrote in traditional paragraph structure, including Andy or I. So Andy and I. But I'd like to ask you, Sarah, when you submitted, did you think Carly Finlay and Black Ink, so Carly is the editor of the anthology and it's published by Black Ink, do you think they were expecting to get a graphic piece?
Yeah. Yep. I mean, they didn't say, like, if someone says no, like no graphic pieces, I won't. But otherwise I'm like, because, you know, I have this like secret agenda of wanting to get visual storytelling narratives in kind of literary spaces. I don't know if that's just a crazy dream or, you know, a possibility, but, you know, it's in this book. Because I just feel like it's a legitimate and interesting and, you know, addition to, you know, what is writing, what is storytelling. So yeah, I just did it.
Look, that was a leading question. I have a great love for graphic novels, and one of my favorite works of all time is a graphic novel. So I applaud your not so secret agenda, and I think you should continue. But, you know, moving on from the fact that your piece is, you know, called Drawing My Way, and it is a graphic cartoon. In your piece, you actually express how the ability to write and draw, particularly to draw and to be creative and express yourself in that way, was an empowering moment in your childhood. And to quote, you know, your piece actually says your mum helped you learn to dance the pen. Can you tell us about that and finding your way to express yourself?
Yeah. So this is a slight tangent, but I'm doing an anthropology course at the moment, and there's an anthropologist called Merleau-Ponty, and he talks about how drawing is a form of embodiment in the same way that dancing is. Like, it's very embodied. And to me, writing is like a next level of abstraction that is very hard for me. And coming to writing through the embodiment of the pen was how I needed to get there. But there's still something about representing things spatially and kind of in a space-time sequence that just makes sense to me in ways that words alone, I find quite hard. So yeah, I'm just really great. Like my mum is a teacher. She was actually a maths teacher, so she and I were like polar opposites in our thinking and understanding. She's very good at abstract thinking, but she was able to see for me that I was very curious and interested. It was just hard to get me to focus myself, and drawing was a way to get that energy kind of focused, and to kind of calm down my mind enough to be able to really listen. So like she was absolutely pivotal for helping me to kind of get there. Yeah.
In your piece, you also talk about, at the very end of your piece, you also talk about nowadays in the professional context, when you are at work, when you are doing real-time graphic storytelling, you will announce to, the people there, to the people in the room, I have dyslexia, I might make a spelling mistake. Will you, help me out? And your story says that causes people to more fully engage with your story, with your work, with your art. And, it was a very exciting thing to read, because that's certainly how I feel. And I think maybe many other people feel almost liberating. Can you firstly tell me if I've interpreted that the way you meant, but also how that kind of ownership in your adult life makes you feel?
Yeah, so definitely it's an ownership thing, and it's also just an advocacy thing. Again, it's me trying to use my privilege and my access, being a fairly sort of public figure in a room, doing a cool thing that people are like, whoa, that's cool. And say, hey, I have this learning disability that creates this trouble. And I know lots of you in the room are really good at words and spelling. So if we can work together. And so it's this idea that it's kind of a collective piece. And it also breaks down the barrier of me being like the artist, this reified artist. And it's more like I'm listening to their conversation and representing it. And it is a dialogue, and sort of, it just makes it more collaborative in ways that are really beautiful. And that came from me just being publicly humiliated, unfortunately, by clients sort of laughing at me because of the, quite obtuse spelling mistakes that I made, and them saying, aren't you a professional? Isn't this your job? Like, shouldn't you know? And, like having that for years and just not knowing what to say, so that's why I'm very much now like, okay, upfront, and it just circumnavigates again that shame and that sort of teasing that I just cannot stand.
That word shame coming up again, I find it difficult every time I remember, and I remember on a daily basis, that people with disabilities and people with difference feel shame because other people put it on them. And I am looking forward to the day that we all help to change that. Andy, in your piece, you actually write twice, if I remember correctly, that you aren't disabled. You say, I am not disabled. And then at the end of the piece, you get to the point where you kind of embrace is the wrong term, but you do say, I am disabled. You take the reader on that journey, but can you kind of articulate for those who are listening to us today who haven't yet read your piece, why it was important to frame your piece like that, to start off with not identifying as disabled and then get there?
Yeah, look, partly because that's the way it was. Like, I'm 49, so I grew up in Bendigo in the 70s. Where disability was the kids in the Spastic Society bus. It was not considered to be something that was, 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 kids. It was considered to be other. It was a negative, shameful, lower rung identity. So, you would, even now, I think people say, oh, I don't think of you as disabled, as a compliment. And so I think, it was important for me to write in that mode, because that was my experience. I really didn't think of myself as disabled until being an adult, really, and reflecting back on my experience and thinking, well, actually, yeah.
I have a quote from your piece, Andy, and you are talking about your experience as a teenager, and you received a diagnosis and you had some operations and you felt other and different. And the quote is, "You always have to leave the hospital or the clinic, face the world and its hostility to question marks." That is a beautiful sentence, Andy, and thank you for writing it. And that sentiment and that feeling stuck with me because it did resonate with some of my own experiences that I had as an adult, not as a teenager. And I guess it also kind of sums up a whole theme of the anthology. And I think that's one of the reasons why you have the first piece in the anthology, because it's such a universal experience for those of us who are in this anthology. And I guess I'd like to, were you aware that was such a good sentence and that might resonate so well?
Oh, no, I come back to this metaphor a few times because of the shape of my spine. I've wanted years ago to write a poem that was talking about that shape, talking about spinal curvature. And it occurred to me that from the side, perhaps that shape is a bit like a question mark. So, I used it in a poem years ago. And yeah, it occurred to me that anyone who is different in some way, bodily or, neurodivergent, or it actually, we do embody questions. We make people realize that there is many ways of being human. And that can be really confronting for people. It shouldn't be, but it is, because we have this kind of dominant idea of what's quote unquote normal or what is expected or what's healthy. And it's why I sort of love both of your essays, that I just felt like they both, provoke that sense of questioning inherently, that really you can be an artist and not be able to spell, or struggle with that. You can fluctuate tremendously with your own health and, and it not be visible even. So, yeah, I don't know. I think what I've loved about just being involved in this process to interviews and conversations and discussions around it is that, the mainstream non-disabled community hopefully get a chance to let those questions happen so that it's not about just suddenly answering them and everything's okay, but just breathing in that space of kind of, oh, that's different. This is a different kind of embodiment or way of being. So how do we allow these ways of being to flourish? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Without immediately coming up with the answer, but just letting the questions happen. Yeah.
That is so well said, Andy. I would like to ask you both about the social model of disability. For those listening, the social model of disability is essentially a rejection of the medical mode, which, makes everything about a diagnosis or a medical condition, and to sum it up in a very not nuanced way, blames the person as opposed to looking outward and looking at society and the barriers that do exist that and that need to be changed. How do you both, and let's go with Sarah first, how do you both feel about the social model of disability, but specifically, do people ask you, do you like to be called disabled or do you prefer person with a disability? I got asked that on the radio this morning and it's been buzzing around my mind all day. And I think I flood my answer, and I'm really looking to both of you to give me your insight. How do you feel about when people ask you that and about the terminology?
It's complex, eh?
Yeah, it really is, right?
I feel like it's up to each person, right? How they want to identify and what language they want to use. That's all I would say. I don't explicitly say I'm disabled, but I do talk about dyslexia, dyscalculia, being neurodivergent. I've had to practice dyscalculia so many times to be able to say it. Anyway, but I don't explicitly say disabled, but I also have no problem with being disabled, if that makes sense. But I also feel like the social model of disability is so important, and I feel like this whole anthology really advocates for it, because we do live in a constructed society. We've designed all of this. It's not like we're in some naturally occurring thing, like, and I think that's what people don't really think about, is like, we can engineer better lives for diverse needs. Like, that is what this is about, and expanding what is considered to be normal, so I think, I just wanted to, I didn't answer that anyway.
You did answer that. You did answer it very well, and I think you did better than I did earlier today. Andy, what are your thoughts?
Look, I would certainly totally agree with what Sarah said about, people really have to find the language that they're comfortable with, that suits their experience and their ambitions and so on. So, I personally feel, like I'm very happy to be identified as disabled, but also, if I don't push it either. I think the only difference, if I think of it now, between saying disabled person and person with a disability does almost sound a bit more like your own personal thing. Mm. Whereas when I think of disabled, I think, I can think of it a thing that has happened to you. Like, and I sometimes talk about society being disabling. Poverty can be disabling. Like being Indigenous can be disabling, being non-white can be disabling, being a woman can be disabling. So I think that sort of language can really help to talk about the things that can happen to people because of their situation. Even though, sure, I mean, I think we talk about the conflict between the medical model and the social model. And I guess the thing about the medical model is that if they work together, we could perhaps have better medicine, because that's the idea, really. We don't want to throw it out, but we want it to be better.
Absolutely. Andy, what you have just said makes me want to hold up this pile of books that I have handily sitting here. Growing Up Disabled in Australia is part of a series. There is also Growing Up Queer, Growing Up African, Growing Up Aboriginal in Australia. And the next one, I believe, coming out at the end of the year is Growing Up in Country Australia, because we can all be more than one thing and have multiple identities. We are coming to the end of our chat today, but before we go, I would like to ask each of you if there is anything that you would like to say. I know that you have done other interviews and other media, and I know, of course, that you have written what you wanted to write in this anthology, but I would like to give you both the floor to say anything that you think should be said. Andy, do you want to go first?
Sure. Two quick things. I think for anyone who reads the anthology, and if they find a writer that they love or they're interested in, please follow up their work or try to find them on social media or whatever, and get their books if they've got books already. If you're a publisher, publish these people. Other writers that are in here should have full-length books themselves in the future. So, because a lot of these people are newly published, and I think, I feel like we're at the start of something, or we're riding a wave where there are people writing some amazing stuff. And I think I really look forward to more books like these people coming out, and even the people that missed out on the anthology who submitted work, they're going to have stuff coming out too. So that would be what I would want to say.
Well said, Andy and Sarah.
Yeah, I love what you said, Andy. I think that's fantastic. And I would just say, look out for more disabled creators and writers, and listen to their stories and connect with them. And also if particular stories in the anthology have been meaningful to you, just say a little hello to, who wrote it, or an email or whatever, because that's really meaningful and it's great to connect. So, yeah.
Andy and Sarah, I have really enjoyed speaking with you today. I have read both of your pieces several times. I know I will read them again, and I will read the entire anthology again. It is a privilege to be in there, and it has been a privilege for me to read your work and to speak with you today. I highly commend the anthology to everybody who is watching today. It is something that I think that we can all be proud of that is being published in Australia. Andy and Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. And I look forward to seeing or chatting with everybody in 2 weeks' time. There will be an interview with Kylie Maslin, the author of Show Me Where It Hurts, A Life to Chronic Illness.
It's a great book.
It really is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Enjoy, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.